Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the Chabura. Today we have part 2 of our exciting series where our Talmidim take over. Last week I had the privilege of sharing, and this week we have our dear Ben Rothstein who will be presenting on a correspondence between Rav Kook and Rav Qafih on the authenticity of Kabbalah, a nice spicy topic. About our speaker, Ben Rothstein was born in East Barnet and attended Yeshivat HaKotel. He studied ancient languages at UCL, University College London, and is spending a year working in the Jewish community before resuming his studies for a master's in Hebrew and Semitic studies. He currently lives in Mill Hill with his wife Shoshana. I personally am very fortunate to be able to call Ben a friend, and I'm grateful for our banter-filled relationship. Ben is really a knowledgeable fellow, as you'll soon see. He's also an active member of the Chabura, and we thank him for all of the work that he does with us. On that point, I do want to share how, in my view, this is really what makes the Chabura so special. We just launched our new curriculum, and when people talk about reasons to join, to become members, they really emphasize our unbelievable content, our journals, the books, and so forth. But on top of this, we have this beautiful network of really incredible people from around the world who are all united by a commitment to Torah, truth, and Hashem. So the fact that I feel so close with some random curly-haired British guy is really amazing to me and really what makes the Chabura so special. So with that said, thank you all for being here. Ben, thank you so much for sharing with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ahad. Okay, so let's share the screen. All right, we're going to talk about what Sina called, when he did the title of it, he called it the Kabbalistic divide. Sina likes his titles. So this is the Kabbalistic divide, letters exchange between Rav Kook and Mori Qafih. So I'm going to go through a bit of background about the individuals, about the letters, then go through some of the arguments that they make with each other. A few things to point out. Firstly, I am neither a Makubal nor a Makubal. I have no proper, grounding in the certain esoteric traditions of Judaism. I'm going to explain them as best I can. But if you want to suggest anything else or chime in with anything, please do. Also, these translated letters are going to be released in a book by the Chabura in probably the end of this year, start of next year, along with letters between Eliyahu ben Amozeg and Shadal, also on the topic of the authenticity of Kabbalah. So if you are interested in this topic, that might be a worthwhile investment. But yeah, so the Kabbalistic divide, let's begin. So, yeah, there we go. Okay. So general introduction to Kabbalah. As I said, I'm not an expert in this, but there's a few things to be aware of as we start. The first thing is, if you want a really good introduction to Kabbalah, read Major Trends. It's definitive in this realm. Say what you want about Gershom Shalom, and I'm sure people will. But this is absolutely one of the strongest kind of the clearest presentations of the development of Kabbalah. Even if I sat through the first chapter where he's kind of ripping on Maimonides and and I sat through that quite uncomfortably, it's still very if you want to get a good introduction, that's something to read. But as far as introductions that I'll give you are concerned, so the first thing is that the Zohar is not the same as Lurianic Kabbalah. The Zohar is a work which is pseudepigraphically assigned to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, published by Moshe de Leon. We won't get into the question of authorship. Well, it's a little bit addressed in the letters. We'll touch on it maybe towards the end. But the Zohar's, theology or theogony is not the same as Lurianic Kabbalah, and people often conflate the two. So Lurianic Kabbalah is the Kabbalah of the Ari, Ashkenazi Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, and there are quite a few differences between them. So I just want to make them clear, okay? And then maybe we'll talk about the difference between them and what might be a more Maimonidean perspective because of our letters that we'll come to in a minute. But the Zohar has the Sephirotic doctrine without mentioning Sephirot. So you don't really come across the term Sephirot in the Zohar, but you do have, I put the little tree on the right for you, this development of the Sephirot, which comes up prominently in the Zohar. But it's important to know that in the Zohar, the Sephirot are within God. So this is not God emanating down into the world. This is all within God. So everything is God. But how does there exist something that is not God? Well, it exists because within God, this whole thing of the Sephirot is taking place, this whole theogony is one word. There's, a few ways of describing it as taking place. And God is kind of in union with himself. We'll come and talk maybe some more about that towards the end as well. But God is in union with himself, and everything that's created is really just at the end point of God, which is, some people would say that seems somewhat pantheistic, because, everything is within God. As if you visualize it as a circle, then kind of the Sephirot are circular within that circle. Okay, that's all taking place within God. However, in Lurianic Kabbalah, the Sephirot are how God emanates to not God, right? And this is the doctrine of Tzimtzum, which is much more monotheist friendly-ish. I probably should have put a, ish at the end of that. Monotheist friendly in the sense that the Ari, when we're talking about the Sephirot, and we're talking about the doctrine of Tzimtzum, where God kind of contracts into himself and leaves this empty space of not God, allows for something that's not God to exist, whereas the Zohar, purely Zohar kind of theology, doesn't allow for that. Everything is God. Whereas here, there is space for not gods. And, there are people who have discussed, what Tzimtzum exactly is, whether they say literal or not, but fine. They are, this is not God, but instead, basically, we talk about in Lurianic, I don't think I put it on there. Yeah, we'll come back to it in a second. Yeah, but Lurianic Kabbalah believes in divine sparks due to Shabirah HaKelim, which is the breaking of the vessels. So what this is, very briefly, there's something in the chat. No, I don't know if there's something came up with the chat. Okay, fine. Sorry, I thought someone had posted something. Lurianic Kabbalah believes in divine sparks due to Shabirah HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels, which means as follows. There is the Ein Sof, which is the something that we can't speak about God. Okay, so the Kabbalists accept that there is that God fundamentally is unknowable. In fact, they just call this thing Ein Sof, with no end. God also has no beginning, but human beings can't even fathom what it means to have no beginning, but we can kind of get an idea of what it would mean to have no end. So they call God Ein Sof because that's something that is not gonna, is not us using a metaphor to understand, which it would be if you said God had no beginning. So this is just the purest description that they use. But then essentially, when God contracted into himself, according to this doctrine of Shabirah HaKelim, kind of ray of light shot forwards and went into the area of Tzimtzum. And, all these Sephirot kind of exist at that point. And they correspond to what's called Adam Kadmon, like the primordial or the supernal man. And that's if you look at this, it's like you can quite easily superimpose the image of a human being over this diagram. And so they flow pretty well through the lower three Sephirot, but the upper three Sephirot, but through the lower ones, essentially the light cannot be contained and they break. Okay, and so bits of divine spark fly into everything that's in Tzimtzum. So Tzimtzum is not God, but then all of the divine light that exploded out of these kelim, these vessels, finds a place within part of the not God. And so this is what's known as panentheism, in that everything has as they like to say in certain when they teach children in certain parts of England, I'm sure in America and Israel as well, everyone has a little bit of Hashem in them. So that's panentheism. That's from Lurianic Kabbalah. Okay, 22. Yeah. So let's pause there for a second and just explain a little bit more, because let's talk about the ideas of Kabbalah being anthropocentric, as opposed to what we'll talk about Maimonides mysticism a little bit. That's theocentric. So over here I have my glass of water, which I made a bracha on earlier. Here's one I prepared earlier. And when I made the bracha, the question is, what happened? So if you ask Harambam, you'll read Hilchot Deot, you'll see that what happened was I took a moment out of my day to focus on the fact that God created everything, God is the sovereign of everything, and to appreciate the fact that I'm about to drink this water, which is going to facilitate my relationship with God. It's a beautiful thing. It raises my, my intellect. It refines my existence, my midot. But it still places God front and center of everything, and God is not being affected by anything I do. You ask Lurianic Kabbalah, if you go within this panentheistic view, then what happens? Well, one of the sparks that broke from the supernal light through the Shabirah HaKelim ended up in this water. When I recited the Baracha, and I say recited specifically, I returned that spark to the divine. Consequently, it doesn't matter about my mental state, my focus. I can rattle off a bracha and that's fine, because what I did was recite the magic words, hey, witch doctor, and send the supernal spark back up to God. Okay. So that's a much more, people would call it theurgic or other kinds of things. Again, I'm going to try and steer away from me telling like what I think about these things, but people would call it, term that theurgic or manipulative or anything like that. The kind of segula oriented ideas. Okay. So that's the kind of a big difference between what we'll say Maimonides, conception of Jewish practice versus, the Kabbalistic one. So these are some things to bear in mind when we're going to look at these Kabbalistic ideas. I'm going to do a quick introduction now to some of the personalities. So Rav Kook. Rav Kook was born in 1865 in Eastern Europe. At the time, I think it was in Lithuania. At the time, it was part of the Russian Empire. He was recognized as an Eloi in Volozhin, the famous, known as the mother of yeshivot, or mother of yeshivas, to be honest. He became close with the Netziv, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, and he also went to study Kabbalah with the Leshem, wrote a sefer. He's known as the Leshem. The sefer was called Leshem Shabo V'Achloma, which is the different jewels in the breastplate of the Kohen, the Kohen Gadol. So he really is prominent on both fronts in terms of his, quality as a halachist, as a Talmudist, so to speak, and also on the Kabbalistic front. He became the Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Jaffa, and then Jerusalem, then Mandate Palestine. So he's a pretty significant player in the Zionist, development as well. However, because of his Zionism, anti-Zionist detractors frequently misquoted him. They often completely forged letters from him trying to show how Zionism is straying from the path of the Holy Torah. And they did it with quite significant success. Despite the fact that he had support from the whole gamut, really, of Jewish people at the time. Rav Chaim Ozer, Rav Baruch Ber, the Rebbe Rayatz, the Lubavitch Rebbe at the time, Diana Bramsky in London, Rav Hutner, right, among other people. These were his supporters, and his opponents came up with such eloquent attacks as his name is Avraham Yitzchok Kook, which backwards spells key, which means vomit. So clearly you can see, not a person to be trusted. So he had a bit of a difficult time with that, and it caused a lot of problems that, not go into that now. But key for us, however, shall be this quote from Sholem. He describes Rav Kook, and he writes as follows: Rabbi Kook's great work entitled Orot HaKodesh is a veritable theologia mystica of Judaism, equally distinguished by its originality and the richness of its author's mind. It is the last example of productive Kabbalistic thought of which I know. So Sholem is a big fan of the kind of Kabbalistic ideas that are advanced by Rav Kook. Important person to know. So let's take a look at Mori Qafih. He was born in 1850 in Sana'a. He was briefly the chief rabbi of Yemen, but even though he wasn't that for so long, he sat on the Beit Din there for decades. He established the Dor De'ah movement, and they are known as Dar Da'im, which is an Arabic style plural. So Arabic pluralizes without, anyway, it has things called broken plural. So you get Dar Da'im for the plural of Dor De'ah. Okay, so what did this do? It moved away from the superstitious, brackets Lurianic, practices in favor of rational approaches of Harambam and Rabbeinu Sa'adia. It also involved restoring halakha to be in accordance with Mishneh Torah. Okay, and he instituted the study of secular subjects in the yeshiva alongside usual Torah studies. So a few things to pay attention to here is the fact that in Yemen, and there's an article, who wrote an article on this? It might have been Fa'ur, I'm not sure if it was someone else or Fa'ur, about how, the Yemenites had essentially had the Shulchan Aruch kind of foisted on them by kind of European people and people living in the land of Israel, saying, look, this is this new updated version of halakha. We've even got it in today. I don't remember who it was. Maybe it was Avraham Yosef, I think, who said, the Yemenites don't keep the 9 days. They need to kind of get with the program or get out, basically. And he said that on public national radio. And so I think Harav Rasson Arusi was like, what on earth are you talking about? Like this is just nuts. He said, can you, and so he went on radio, Rav Yosef, and then said, I will not apologize, and I will not explain myself to Hasrei Hada'at, who think that they can eat meat during the 9 days. Anyway, yeah, thinly veiled prejudice. Mori Qafih was also well known for pursuing manuscripts, especially of Harambam. There's lots of manuscripts we have now that are thanks to him. So there's some copies of Mishnah as well, I think, that he got hold of. So a significant player. Okay. Let's talk about, yes, I just brought this from Eben Sapir, which actually is there's someone called Yaakov Sapir, Harav Yaakov Sapir, who traveled around the world, like as far as Australia, collecting money and also meeting people, and he kept a diary of it. It's pretty interesting. Anyway, so this is quite a funny note. I actually also realized that I don't have a watch here, which is very dangerous. Okay, it's 10 to 9. So he writes this book called Eben Sapir, where he records his journeys, and Mori Qafih actually quotes it. He actually talks about it in his letter. We're not going to talk about see exactly why he brings it now, but in terms of his movement of the Darim to remove the kind of superstitious practices. So here you'll see an example. Okay, so he's recording how they used to kind of sing the song Bar Yochai, and he says, because they never had like lefanim rather, they never had in days gone by, the Jews in Yemen didn't have access to the kind of precious books. Yachshavu kol כל דבר שהוא עלה בדפוס קדוש אמת ונכון שאין להרהר אחריו כהלכה למשה מסיני. They think anything written down or printed is holy, truthful, established, and there's no reason to cast aspersions over it. It's like halacha given to Moses at Sinai. ואף דברי מינות חס ושלום אם בדפוסו לא יבקרו אחריהם. Even if it's heretical, God forbid, if it's printed, they just assume it, take it as gospel. ושגם בקבלה כאשר ראיתי פה ספרי נחמיה היה היון. I saw here the books of Nehemiah Hayun. We'll talk about him a bit later. He was a Sabbatean. Even after Shabtai Tzvi was outed, he was a Sabbatean. But Kabbalah, we already burnt these books. We destroyed these heretical works. But they call them holy and blessed. They think because of their great, they spend most of their time studying Zohar and Kabbalah. They think that Bar Yochai wrote the song Bar Yochai, which is just a phenomenal, like, could you imagine? That would just be brilliant. But they think he wrote the song Bar Yochai, all 13 verses, or however many there are. Or at least some of his students did. Therefore, they declare this song holy and they sing it as Shabbat begins. They make derashot, heaps and heaps of hints, which is right. This is all borrowed rabbinic terminology, or whatever. Heaps and heaps of hints and secret wisdoms, right, that they make from the song Bar Yochai. ולכן זקן חוכמה הקבלה יקום ויעמוד מעוטה בשחרות טליתו ברגש קודש ובמורה איומה והתלהבות עצומה. Okay, he stands there. They get an elder who's seasoned in the parts of Kabbalah, and he stands, he's wrapped up, ומזמר זה השיר בגודל של הבטחה וכל הקהל עונים בר יוחאי, and he sings this song and they all reply with the words בר יוחאי. אחר כל החרוז בנעימה רבה מתפללים ערבית עם סר הכוכבים ויוסעים. And then they all sing it verse by verse, and they sing the chorus, blah, 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 whatever, and then they pray Arvit when at Seit HaKochavim, and then they all go home. And then they do the rest normally. But it's important to notice this was the scene. Yemen had kind of when Mori Qafih came and said, we need to go back to how it used to be before we kind of got him, taught about all these Lurianic or mystical ideas. This was the world that he was saying that to, and it created quite a big split. It wasn't so well received all the time. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the letters. Let's talk a bit about the letters, in basic terms. So the first letter was dated the 26th of Tevet, 5691, 15 January 1931, and which that's the letter that Rav Kook sends to Mori Qafih. Mori Qafih replies 28th of August 1931, which is about 3 months before he dies. He dies in Kislev. So this is ER. No, once they kind of died at Kislev. That doesn't make sense. 1 second, hang on. But he died. I think he dies a couple of months after this in 1931. He dies towards the end of 1931. He dies. So this is one of the last things that he wrote. He'd had correspondence, by the way, before with Rav Kook, because Rav Kook, when he heard about the community in Yemen, he sent them questions like, do you really marry more than one wife? And do you really do all these things that, write a get in Arabic, or I don't remember, things like that? And they reply back saying, yes, we do. It's like, wow. So, they've had correspondences before. And this is one thing to be aware of. The second thing to note about the letters that's really interesting is the Mori Qafih attaches multiple signatures, right? His name kind of appears, I've cropped it out of the picture, he signs it, and this is Allah Khatum on the signatories as well. Yahya ben Salam Alabit, Salam ben Yahya Korach, Yahya ben Yosef Giat, Ratsha ben Salam Sarum. I don't fully know if I pronounced those all correctly, probably didn't, so I apologize. But you've got, so it's not like Mori Qafih is standing alone and he's made these things up. Like, he has significant backing from the people around. So he's got multiple signatories on this document. Finally, the letters are also written in traditional, eloquent style, weaving together numerous biblical and rabbinic quotations, most frequently in praise of each other. And it's beautiful to see that you can disagree with people and not kind of attack their character at the same time. So I've underlined here every time and this is just the opening paragraph of Mori Qafih's response to Rav Kook, describing Rav Kook. And every color is a different quote. So you've got, starting Rabbi Amim Dabrona Umte, which is a quote from the Gemara. Kisivte Kohen, that's a quote from Mishlei. I think At Karuv Mushacha Sochech is Yirmiyah Yechezkel, I can't remember now. But by the way, that which was used, by the way, in the blue underlined to show that was used in a teshuvah of Ribash. To introduce as well. Yashem Akshim Hadurim, very nice. Which is a quote from the Talmud as well, which, by the way, actually preserves an earlier, more accurate textual variant with this quote, but also is actually, you need to kind of be aware when you're reading these, there's a lot of subtext going on. So one example is this last line here. So he's like singing the praises of Rav Kook here. But so Rama Rabbanana, a rabbinical student, the Rahamin Le B'nei Ma'ateh, where the people of his town are fond of him. Rahamin Le, they like him, they love him. Okay. So the context of this piece of Talmud, though, is that I don't remember who it is now, which I've forgotten. But there's an accusation that the people who like, the people of the city, like this particular Emorah because he's lenient and doesn't chastise them when they do the wrong thing. So there could well be like a subtext here where Mori Qafih is saying, you're going with all this Kabbalistic stuff. I don't know if you're doing that for the good of the masses or because you believe it, but if you're doing it because people, if you're not chastising them, then maybe that's something you should be doing. So, there's a lot of subtext that goes on that you need to, be aware of reading into as well. Like, also, it could just be nothing, but I would, think that their minds are working on quite a high level of thought. And so these kind of ideas are probably, or the connotations of what they're quoting should probably be in their minds. Anyway, so let's move on to addressing some of these letters themselves. So 25 minutes of introduction. The rest of this will just fly by. So let's take a look at some of the questions. So, was the Zohar written by Rabbi Shimon ben Bar Yochai? So this is a contentious question, which I'm not going to address myself. I'm going to see what they have to say about it. Thank you for the chat. Yeah. So this is an argument advanced by Mori Qafih. This is the Gemara in Sanhedrin. This is from when it's Talmud, especially. I try and get manuscripts or Geniza fragments that you can use on the Friedberg Geniza project. They're very nice. I very much like Geniza stuff. So, Tanu Rabbanan, this is Sanhedrin. Mishemetu nevi'im ha'achronim, Hagai, Zechariah, Malachi. Once these prophets died, Nistalaka Shechina, other texts reader, Nistalaka Ruach HaKodesh, Mi Israel. So the divine presence departed from Israel after their death, right? Because they were the end of the prophets. There's in Seder Olam, I think it also says about Alexander, the great Alexander of Macedonia, B'yamav batelu hanevuah. In his days, nevuah was ceased. Okay, but despite this, they would still make use of the bat kol, of a heavenly voice. But I fell into the trap of translating it commonly. Whatever a bat kol is, they would use it. It's clearly linked to some kind of nevuah or shekhinah. It's something. Not clear what, but they still used it. It's a lower level of prophecy. Okay. And we know, in fact, that a bat kol did actually speak to Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. When he came out the cave. That was, you could have jumped in there so I could drink water, but it could also have been a rhetorical question. But when he came out the cave, so, the bat kol says, did I bring you out to destroy my world? Get back in the cave. And then, okay. So, with this in mind, there's no nebuah anymore. Let's look at a story that's brought in the Talmud in Marilah, with a very interesting story. So Amaru. So sorry, the context of this story is that the non-Jewish government has placed some decrees upon the Jewish people, severely limiting their religious life. Okay. Some of those, they are not allowed to keep the laws of Nidah, they're not allowed to do various different things. Okay. So one of the certain rabbi goes undercover. He gets his hair cut like a beluriot, right? Like in the non-Jewish hairstyle. And he goes undercover and he suggests, well, hang on a second, it's to your advantage that the Jews keep doing their religion for various reasons. Okay. And they, they're convinced by it. But then at the last minute, he's foiled. He's discovered that he's really Jewish, and they reinstate all the decrees. So the rabbis are stuck. So Ameru. So the rabbi said, Mi elech vivatel hagazera. Who will go and nullify this decree for us? Someone has to go to the emperor and deal with it. Yelech Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai shehu melumad benisim. Should Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai go? He is regularly receives miracles. V'acharab mi elech Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yosei. How about after him should go Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yosei, should follow after him. Amar lahem Rabbi Yosei ve'ilu haya abba halafta kayam yocholim atem lomar li ten mincha laharicha. So this is a lot of background because of the story. It comes into play in the story. So it says really like you're gonna if my father was alive, would you say go and give your son to the slaughter? I'm not going to Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. That's a terrible idea. He is known for setting people on fire, right? So Amar lahem Rabbi, but also I don't want to go into the Roman generals because the Roman there's no guarantee of getting back alive. So Amar lahem Rabbi Shimon ilu haya abba Yochai, kind of my father Yochai was still alive. Would you be able to tell him, give your son over to the slaughter just to go to the Roman, the government and argue? There's no guarantee of coming back alive. So Rabbi Yosei ana azilna dilma anishle Rabbi Shimon hu dekam istafina. So I'm afraid Rabbi Yosei says I will go and not my son Rabbi Elazar, because I'm afraid that he will do something, say something out of line. Basically, Rabbi Shimon will punish him. So Kabbalah leidololi anshe. So Rabbi Shimon then said, okay, but I won't punish him. I won't say anything wrong. But still he did. So what's that story? So now we're getting to the story, because the story is to explain why Rabbi Shimon kind of punished or Rabbi Elazar. So when they were walking along the way, they were asked a question. How do I know that the blood of a sheretz of rodent, whatever you want to call a sheretz, discussion, fine, that it's tameh? Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yosei. So Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yosei, he kind of twisted his mouth. He mouths kind of the words. Amaran says, this is the thing that is tameh for you. It's a darashana pasuk. Amalo Rabbi Shimon, from the mouthing, kind of you trying to, mouthing the answer. You are clearly a student of Talmid Chachamim. But still, because I am the master and you should not have answered the halakhic question in my presence, you will not make it back alive, you will die. So Yasali Kratham Ben Temalion. So Ben Temalion, we'll discuss who that is in a second as a tangent because it's interesting, comes out to greet them. And he says, Rasonachem, Avo Imachem, do you want me to come with you? Bachar Rabbi Shimon Amar, Shifha Shel Bet Aban is Damen La Malach Shelosha Pe'ramim. The maidservant of my ancestor, that's Hagar, chanced upon an angel, or an angel was sent to her 3 separate occasions. And I haven't even had it once. So Yavanes Mikon Makom. But you know what? If Ben Temalion is going to help me, I'll accept the help from any location. So what do we see from here? This is Merila Yod Zayin Amud Aleph crossover to Amud Bet. So what do we see here? Rabbi Shimon in the Gemara, in the Talmud, which is a book, authenticated by the Supreme Courts of the Jewish people. It's validated by all the kalot, however you want to describe the authority of the Talmud. It's clearly saying that Rabbi Shimon never had revelation. Okay, he did not have nevuah. Nevuah didn't exist. He had a bat kol. That's all. And here he didn't even have a bat kol, and cries out that he never received nevuah. He never received a malach even. So now let's look at what the Zohar has to say right at the beginning about this, about the stuff that takes place in the Zohar. Yomer Elohim na'aseh Adam. So the pasuk says, Elohim said, let's make Adam. Okay. So the Pasuk in Tehillim says, Sod Hashem Lire'av. So God informs, this is the Zohar is connecting this idea that God informs the secrets to those who fear him. Okay. Patachahu Sabad Sabin. Okay, so the Sabad Sabin began, Amar, and said, Sabad Sabin means that the kind of elder of the elders. So if you remember can we go all the way back up to here actually? Yeah. So let's go back to here. We've got the Sephirah diagram. The Sabin are the elder Sephirot. So Binah and Chokhmah. Okay, the kind of the lower ones of these 7 down here. Binah and Chokhmah are the Sabin, they're the elders. Kether, which is the one that you can see is linked to the Ein Sof, is called Sabad Sabin. It's the highest level of the Sephirotic tree. Okay, so Sabad Sabin appears. Where are we? Yeah, here we go. Sabad Sabin speaks, and Sabad Sabin, by the way, has 2 configurations, 2 parts of him, which we'll see in a second. And it said, Shimon, Shimon, man hu da amar vayomer Elohim na'aseh Adam. It says, who is this who said na'aseh Adam? Who is that? Right? Maini hu ha'chahai Elohim. Who is this Elohim who said na'aseh Adam? Okay. And while Shimon was distracted by hearing this voice calling to him, Adahachi paracha hu Sabad Sabin v'lo hamalei. Sabad Sabin ran away. You know, he flew off. He disappeared, and Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai did not see him. And from the fact that Shimon ben Yochai was addressed as Shimon and not Rabbi Shimon without the honorific, clearly indicated to him, Amar Chavrai Vadai Hai Hu Kudsha Berichu de Idmar Bey Vatik Yomin Yativ. What spoke to me just now was the Atik Yomin. Okay, so of the 2 parts of Fin, the 2 configurations of Keter, of Sabad Sabin, the higher Sephirah, you have the Atik Yomin, the old Ancient of Days, and you have the Arich Anpin, the long face. Okay, and the Atik Yomin is the masculine, it was affiliated with the masculine trait, and the Arich Anpin is affiliated with the feminine trait. Okay, and so that becomes developed as follows. The Atik Yomin represents God's immovable essence, and why that isn't the Ein Sof, I don't know. If someone does, please tell me, but that's God's immovable essence. But the Arich Anpin is God's outward manifested will. And Rabbi Shimon is saying, I'm so certain from the fact that I was called Shimon and not Rabbi Shimon, that what spoke to me was not the Arich Anpin, the outward manifestation, it was actually God's essence spoke to me. So not only did Rabbi Shimon hear a bat kol, which we know, not only did he not, he didn't encounter a malach, he didn't encounter prophecy, he encountered the highest level of God's hidden, immovable essence. That is a pretty bold statement to make. The rest of this passage you need to go find is just saying that now we can reveal these Kabbalistic secrets because he was told so by the Atik Yomin. But what this is saying is that he actually had a huge, huge revelation. So Mori Qafih raises this point and says, the Zohar is contradicting something that we know is authoritative. By doing this, you are calling the Talmud a liar. You're calling it wrong, just blatantly incorrect. And he goes on, there are a few other places that the Zohar explicitly says things like, this is it says, Moshe was only punished. What was Moshe's sin? So I would say to you, well, he hit the rock. Okay, that's a very easy answer. The Zohar would say, no, his sin was he gave the Jewish people the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the maidservant of the Gemara, or whatever, and it's considered the Shifcha. And because Moshe gave the people the Mishnah, he was punished by being buried outside of the land of Israel. Okay, that was his sin. So it's quite disparaging about some of the other works, about the ideas going on about the other works. The ideas in the Zohar are kind of read into the other works. There's a line in the Zohar as well that says, I think it's the Zohar, where it says, if the sole purpose of the Torah was to teach us the Torah without the Kabbalistic content, then not only is it unnecessary, but we could have written a better one. Shimon ben Yochai says in the Zohar, we could have written a better Torah than the one that's given. The Torah here is not for, what it says on the tin. It's not the outward peshat meaning or anything like that. It's only for the, esoteric Kabbalistic meaning. And that's what it has to be for. So it's very disparaging. And this ties into this point where he's saying, well, look, according to the Talmud, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai laments the fact that he never has revelation. And here you're telling me he was revealed to by the Atik Yomin. That's completely against the Talmud. Completely against the Talmud. Okay. While we're here, let's talk about Ben Tamalion because it's just fun. So what is this Ben Tamalion? So there's a story I'm going to bring you from Vayikra Rabbah, which is the source of this midrash. It's very nice. So Uvda Avada, if kid had gavra gabe bar Tamalion me'adinarin. There was a story where a certain person deposited with Bar Tamalion, the son of Tamalion. So he's clearly a person. Mea dinarin, 100 dinar. Azal ba'alahon minei, and so he went, and then after he wanted to claim it back. The person said, "I deposited them with you. Can I have them back?" Amar le mada ifkad biadai masrit, masrit biadach. I have given it over to you already. I've given it to you. Amalei ishtabali, swear to me, there's no way you did that. Take a shebu'ah. Ma'avid bar Tamalion. What did he do, bar Tamalion? So natal had kaneh hakakeh. He took a reed. He hollowed it out. Yahav be halem dinarin. He put in the dinarim that he'd been deposited. Sharei mismach aleh, and he began to walk, leaning on the stick. Amar le sor haden kaniya biadach ana mishtava lach, and he said to the guy after he started walking on the stick, he says, "Look, hold my stick, and I'll take the shebu'ah." Given demate leve kanishta, when he got to the kanis, amar mare dehadein beta tava, he invokes God's name, the master of this good house, right? Mad masaret biadaim masreit biadach. What you've given to me, I have given over. Masareit biadach, I've given over to your hands. Which is true because he'd handed him the stick. So he gets out of this shevuah. So he suspects something is amiss in the Talmud. We'll mention it's in the Talmud as well. It's out of anger, but he throws the stick on the ground. And seemingly the stick breaks and the coins start to scatter across. And he begins to collect them. So he says to him, collect them. It's your things that you're taking. So Ben Tamalion is a kind of trickster, a person who is kind of a thief, definitely. But he kind of, at the end of this, his response is like, go on, collect them. It's very sneery, like he's a bit, bit unpleasant, a trickster. Okay. If this sounds familiar to anyone, does anyone knows where else it comes up? There are two answers to this question, where else this comes up. Two very different answers. One is in Talmud, in Nedarim, Qafih, and the other is with Sancho Panza in Don Quixote. Right, this is a story that takes place in front of Sancho Panza. So this is the source for that story. I'm pretty sure it's the source for this story. So but Ben Tamalion, however, is just too good. You know, those kinds of names where you look at them and you're like, yeah, that's definitely a demon. Or some people look at them and say it's definitely a demon. So despite the fact that in the Midrash of Chazal, like it's clearly a person. Like it's a person. He went and donated, like gave him money, and he came to court and walked on a walk. It's like it's a person. Rashi says Ben Tamalion Shed Shakorin Nutium. I don't know. It's a demon that you call Nutiem. Tosafot say Oto Shakorin Lamtuch is what it's written. There are suggestions that what he meant was it's a corruption, and the text was Lamed Tet Tet Yud Nun Lutin, which is a French like kind of little elf. It says here that it's a little elf that kind of runs around wreaking havoc with women. But yes, so Ben Tamalion, it's just an interesting tangent to go on there for 5 minutes or so of who this Ben Tamalion was. In the Talmud, in the Darim, it doesn't give a name. It's just a story with Rabbi, I think. So it doesn't say Ben Tamalion. Here's Ben Tamalion. Here brings the name. Okay, that's an interesting point. So the first thing, as we said, so we looked at the first of the three. So number one, was the Zohar written by Rashbi, and the contradiction between the Talmud and the opening of the Zohar. This is right at the beginning of the Zohar, by the way. It's right at the start. I mean, you can see they're discussing, let us make man. So that's right at the beginning. Okay, let's move on to the next section. Here's a new question. So is all of the Zohar valid? By the way, I'll just say I'm not looking at all of this because Tina told me that I can't go through all the content of the letters because we need to leave some incentive for people to buy the book. So I'll go through some of the kind of more interesting arguments. No, all of them are interesting. Going through some of the arguments that I thought would fit well into a presentation. So here's a question. Is all of the Zohar valid? And this is interesting because people have discussed these kinds of things, right? And what they've discussed is, what they've discussed is, you've got things like, even the Vilna Gaon said, when we say the Ari was taught the Kabbalah by Eliyahu Hanavi, it's not all of it, it was some of it, right? Not, some of it. There's also supposedly, even Rav Dessler and, someone else, admitted that they said that, if you took the content that was originally Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai and put it in the Zohar, it would make like 3 pages or something. So, that it's not that this is not like the craziest idea ever. And Rav Kook is also going to admit this, and he's going to say it on both, on 2 counts, on 2 fronts. Okay. The first front is Kabbalah in general, and the next is the Zohar. So let's look at this point with Kabbalah. So Rav Kook begins, so God does not bring about bad things. This is the statement in Talmud as well. Bad, mishaps through the righteous. The kind of innocence of the upright will lead them. They get led in, they end up in the right place. But all of this is with generalities. But with regards to specific details, I'm going to quote you from the Kuzari. I agree, Khazar King, that there are with these 3 things, I can't give you a good reason for them, and I can't relate them to anything. And look over there, what he talks about, but he still writes about this, but the composition itself is not going to be detracted from only discussing the points that I've made. So there are 3 things I can't answer you for. That doesn't detract from the validity of the other things I've said to you. Each thing should be considered on its own merits. And nor were all compositions, works that spoke about Kabbalah equal in their, conception, the way they grasped things, or in the way they expressed things. And there are things that are completely not accepted. Like this Sefer Oz Elohim, which, you brought. Which if it's from Nachman, I don't know why it calls him Nachman instead of Nehemiah, we know that this is an invalid book. From the false Messiah Sabbatai Tzvi. Maybe you have a different sefer called Oz Elohim, not from him, but again, I'm not responsible for that, Rav Kook is saying. I can't help you with. That's not what we want me to do, right? I can't see every book and I can't speak for every book, right? There are people who should not be writing about Kabbalah because they don't understand it yet. They should follow Torah, the simple Torah, and that's a brilliant thing for them to do. Don't get with these, these shonim, don't disregard the entirety of Kabbalah because you came across a couple of problematic works. So he accepts that not all of the works of Kabbalah are really acceptable or valid. Here Rav Kook is willing to concede that over here. But he says, don't throw the baby out with bathwater, right? There are things that, I don't know why they went back there. There are things that are valuable even so. All right, and that's with Kabbalah in general. And now he's going to say it about the Zohar as well, so somewhere else. Oh no, 1 second. Did I not bring it here? Oh no, hang on. No, here it is. Yeah, apparently I didn't bring it in. That's a shame. I don't know why I didn't bring that in here. There's a line where he says about the Zohar as well. He says, like Rabbi Yaakov Emden said, the Yavitz is well known, said, there are parts of the Zohar as well which were added and got stuck in there mistakenly, right? And may not represent true doctrine. That's a problem. And I accept that it's part of the Zohar as well. So he says Kabbalah and the Zohar also are not completely foolproof, Not everything in them is 100% valid. And Rav Kook accepts that, okay? But he says, as I said, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's a lot more to still be gained, okay? So, There we go. Yeah. So let's take a look at the response from Rav Qafih to this point. So his approach is basically to bombard him with like source after source of fairly accepted Kabbalistic works that, in his opinion, are just completely beyond the pale. So here's one of them. So I already indicated to, His Eminence saying, he says, I already indicated to you in the pamphlet he wrote before, in Milchamot Hashem, various other things, where the Zohar ascribes the service, the Avodah, the temple service and prayer as well, to the Elil, the idol of the Ze'er Anpin, the little face, right? Ketzer Apim is called Apim, little face. והוא מבואר ומוסכם בפי המקובלים, מבואר בספר הברית מאמר כף סימן ט"ו בשם יושר לבב, ומעריך שם בכמה ראיות מהזוהר והתיקונים שהעבודה לזעיר אנפין. He's quoting this from in the name of the accepted Mukubalim, he's saying the Sefer HaBarit, the Yosher Lebab, which is a respected Kabbalistic work, where the Avodah has to be given not to God, but to a created demiurge. That's a fancy word they give, right? In Gnosticism, this is the demiurge. So, a created, God that stands in to do the work in this world because God is, above this world and can't do it. So, he's put the Sefer HaBrit in the Yosher Lebab. ושכן כתב הארי בליקוטי תנ"ך על הפסוק בתחו באדוני עדי עד. So the Ari wrote that as well. וכך כתב הרב חיים ויטל בעץ חיים, שאר הכללים פרק י"א, שמשה רבנו עליו השלום אמר לישראל בכניסתן לארץ, כי השם אלוקיכם הוא זעיר ונוקבה. God is the Ze'er and it's Nukba, which is the feminine aspect configuration, right? בספר הכוונות במנהגי הארי כתב שבכל פעם שתוציא שם הוויה מפיך, whenever you say the tetragrammaton, תכוון לזעיר אנפין. You should intend to have in mind that you are saying the name of the זעיר אנפין. Again, a created God. וכן בספר מחברת הקודש, בסדר מוסף שבת כתב כי מלאכים המוני מעלה יתנו כתר לזעיר אנפין. They give, Keter Yudnu Lecha is not Lecha to God, it's Lecha to the Ze'er Anpin. Shehu Hashem Elokeinu, which is the Lord your God. V'kach Katav v'sefer Mitzaref ha'emunah b'safot. So it says in this book, Mitzaref ha'emunah. V'gam b'mikdash melech, which is commentary on the Zohar. Elaha Rab Rabba, it says in the Zohar, the mighty God, Elaha Rab Rabba. Katav, who's Ze'er Anpin? That's the Ze'er Anpin. And this is the crazy part. V'ham chaven le'en sof. If you pray and direct your tefillah to the Ein Sof, to the ineffable, non-understandable God, Ein tefillatho tefillah. Your tefillah is not valid. You cannot pray to God as God. You may only pray to the created representative of God, the intermediary, the created demiurge, whatever you want to call it, which is shocking, right? In fact, the Mikdash Melech doesn't bring it here. He goes on and he says, it's just so interesting because it's so. At one moment, it's similar and different. Let me explain what I mean. The Mikdash Melech continues. He says, if you pray to the Ein Sof melubash, like clothed within the Sefirot aspects, basically, then that's okay. So in other words, you must relate to God through these created aspects. It's just so much like, yeah, we know if you take the Maimonidean approach, you can't understand God, but you're permitted to relate to him. But it's just so far off that track when you're dealing with these created emanations if you're Lurianic, or aspects if you're Zoharic. They're just so far off. וכך כתב נחלת יוסף, again נחלת יוסף, וכמבואר בזוהר שהזעיר אנפין נברא והוא אדם דאצילות. It's representative of the primeval human who stands at the level of Atzilut. וקרא עליו בן חכם ישמח אב, we won't go into that now, fine. Here we go, one second, על כולה וכולה יפלחון לי. Everyone needs to worship the man of Atzilut, the primordial man of Atzilut. Uman demana bircha'an nehai bar yefrashun chatoi kamei imakadisha. If you withhold your kind of homage that you should be paying to this Ze'er Anpin, then your sins will be spelled out in front of the Imakadisha. Okay, Imakadisha, however you want to understand that. There's, what he's doing here is showing you there are many, many works that, in his opinion, are probably, say problematic statements and are considered mainstream Kabbalistic ideas. Musmachim, they are accepted, right? They are muskam b'fi ha'makobalim. Whether that's Reb Chaim Vital, the Ari, the Mitzaref Emunah, Mikdash Melech, Sefer HaBarit, Zohar itself, Nahalat Yosef. So that's his point here, is that, okay, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's no content that's worthwhile within this. He's saying there isn't a baby, is basically what he's saying if within that analogy. Okay, 22 minutes past 9. Okay, let's go on to the third and final, so I did that well, and the third and final point that's made. Now, this is a huge discussion. Are the Sefirot literal? Okay, Rav Kook is going to take the position that they're not. Okay, the Sefirot are not literal depictions of God. They are metaphor. Okay, and we're going to look at how Rav Kook presents that now. But this is a discussion that's wide-ranging within Kabbalah. So someone says, well, I thought they were, like there are definitely people who think that they are directly representative, but Rav Kook is going to say they're not. But let's see what his point is with that and what Mori Qafih responds. So Rav Kook says, if we come to address the expressions as they appear to us, ostensibly at first glance, what you've said, about these parts of fame and and pin, without looking into them deeply. Well, you're going to fall foul of the same problems that the people who have issues with anthropomorphisms do. Which the Tanakh and Chazal, the Chachamim used as well, these corporealizations, these hagshamot. Harambam, and in according to Harambam, it's a little bit disingenuous quoting Harambam here, as we'll see in a minute. We'll see why. Okay, even if you say that there's one God, one master, but he has a body and he is subject to his image, right? It's still complete minut. Okay, Ravad apologized, says, you gotta bear in mind the people who mistakenly thought God did have body. Why? Because the Pesukim themselves misled them. And even more so, they saw in the Agadah Hachamim, which completely messes up the person's mind if they're going to talk about God being physical. So we have to ask, why would the Hachamim and the Torah speak in ways that are going to confuse people? They're going to imply that God has physicality. If there is a need to explain to whether that's the hoi polloi of the Jewish people, whether that's the people who can understand or the simple people, doesn't matter. Once you're describing certain fundamental aspects, you use whatever terminology you think is best to convey those ideas. And they assumed that the Hachamim would later come and explain them the way they need to be explained. And they would be drawn towards fear of heaven and good musar. And both the learned and unlearned people would receive benefit. Rishon, from the first part, Katavi wrote, Shemisha Yamin, someone who believes. We know it's not Yamin, right? We know Yamin, Itikad, all that. I'm not going to go into that now. Shashem, Yibarach, Geshem, Obal, Ha'alayot, who belosafek yoter rame oved avadazara. It's worse than idolatry, where you think there are multiple things with bodies. If you think there's one thing that's composite, that's really problematic. Mikol makom simchat Torah v'anaviyim chazal achareihem ledaber b'chofesh kol kach b'lishonot hanirim k'hagshama v'hav aliyot. But nonetheless, the Torah and the Nevi'im and the Chachamim were very happy to basically willy-nilly go around using these anthropomorphisms. And there was no concern in terms of explaining these deep pure ideas and conceptions, which is really impossible. It's ineffable. It can't be described in any sense anyway. Even if it does so in ways that seem to be talking about multiplicity. For the interest of time, I'm going to skip the rest of it. He basically accepts that, and he quotes the Chavot HaLevavot, where he says that the only people who can really serve God are the philosophers or the Nevi'im, who are able to really have a conception of what it means that God doesn't have any of these qualities we think God has. But he says, Hesed Hashem al kol yisurav, which is a phrase Rav Kook uses elsewhere. This is this, kindness of God is upon all his creations, in the sense that he gave us metaphor to be able to relate to him. It's a very clever argument, because we do believe that, and fundamentally, I think that's basic Jewish doctrine. God is non-understandable whatsoever, right? And God gave us a way of relating to him that is metaphorical. That's not so crazy, that we relate to God. God relates to us in ways we can understand. Harambam says similar things, ostensibly, that, God relates to us in certain ways. In Hilchot Shvai says in the Pasuk, just as a parent chastises a child, so too the Lord your God will chastise you. God uses metaphor to explain how he relates to us. It's very good, very doesn't need my haskama, but it's a very, logical argument to make. And just over here he says as well, he quotes in Etz Chaim as well, in a quote of the Panim Meirot Masbirot, who wrote, Amar Meir be'erkenu amar harav zeh. The Sefirot are be'erkenu, they are with our valuation. They were all said from our perspective. All these ideas of connecting to God are according to the conception of the created beings, right? It's very much Rav Moshe Cordovero, where it comes up with, speaks about this a lot as well, right? That, you've got God is like white light, and we're looking through filters. So the way we perceive God relating to us is not the same way that God is, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that they believed that there was a multiplicity in the divine. It just means that we relate to God that way. But often, this is such a great thing of God that, in order to explain the furthest reaches of his greatness, he gave us these methods, these sefirot, as a way of relating to him, right? And that's what all these are. They're all parables. Okay. So just to recap, the key theological points we're going to take away from this are, according to Rav Kook, the Sefirot do not describe God's essence, meaning they are not Misidah. Instead, they is described from our perspective, seeing the revealed aspect of God, Misidenu. The seeming attack on God's unity or indication of multiplicity is only when taking the statements of the Zohar at face value. Instead, they need to be understood as conveying deep ideas. Number one, deep ideas require deep, possibly misleading language. And number two, these are the 2 points he's working off. These deep ideas are in line with accepted Jewish theology. Now, it is literally 9:30, but which means I probably won't go through this whole passage of Moreh Nevuchim that I put in, despite the fact that it's really crucial to understanding this. Okay, we're going to understand why this is not within Harambam. This doesn't work, and I'm going to sum it up for you. But this is it on the page. When I read through it, if you want to read through it and ignore what I'm speaking about, you can do that. So I'm just going to sum this up, not as well as Harambam wrote it. If you don't want to read through it, but you can listen to me summing it up. Basically, when we talk about God having movement, that's because human beings cannot conceive of any existence that doesn't involve movement, even though movement is not an essential part. It's not the essence of being, right? It's a consequence of being. So, for example, he talks about the king. How do you know there's a king? Well, there's law and order. There's only law and order if there's a king. So I can see there's a king, but I don't know anything about his essence. So too, we're going to say God moves, God stretched out, God moved from one place to another. It doesn't mean that he moved. It's to show that God exists, because human beings cannot deal with the idea that an existent thing could exist without movement. Okay, and so too strength and things like this. This last line here. They were loaned to him, so basically like loan words when we say these things. The physical vessels required to indicate that God takes action were lent to God. And so too with regards to actions, what isn't the essence of the action, but a way of performing the action, was also used as a borrowed term to talk about God, okay? And this part of the Moreh Nebuchim very important as well. This is all from the same chapter, chapter 46 in the first Chelek. It's yes. He's saying here that so why were certain things chosen and not others? Well, speech and sight are needed because, well, if you say I see, that means I understand in English as well. You can say I see. Doesn't mean literal sight. So we already know that literal sight doesn't mean that, but it also is essential to have an understanding that God understands whatever that means. You need to use the word sight. Why don't we ever say that God tastes? Why don't we say that God tasted the lechem? Right? We say that God smelled, we say that God's God wants a reach nichoach. Why don't we say that God tasted the korbanot? Because that is completely unnecessary and would do only damage to say that God tastes, right? Because the Rambam says that the only things we were given were things that involve that are essential and involve being a step back. So I can see something or hear something from afar. If I taste something, it means the physical thing is in my mouth. So God can see and hear, and already you've got a sense that God is distant, right? And it also means that God understands, and that's essential. There is no purpose you would ever need to say that God can taste something. And it also conveys this idea that God is like right there with a physical thing, like completely unhelpful to say things like this, right? Completely unhelpful. So we don't say things like that. We don't say God has a shoulder, right? The only thing you use a shoulder for is for carrying, right? Because why? Touch involves physical contact. As we said, sight can be from afar, sound can be from afar, right? Carrying is physical contact and unnecessary. God doesn't have a digestive system. Like we have a digestive system because we're physical and useless, and if we go without food, we break. So God doesn't need that. What are we going to gain by describing God in such terms? So in other words, what's essential to understand from this point is that metaphor is not just a free-for-all. You can't just say, oh, it's metaphorical and we're describing deep ideas. Metaphor is used correct behechrech as a way of relating to gods, but with very particular choice examples, with very particular reasoning, and only reasoning that you would not conclude absolute terrible problematic ideas from. Okay, so so we'll see as we'll sum up with this. I know I'm over time, sorry. Sum up with this with Mori Qafih says over here. I'm not talking, he says, I'm not talking about the expressions, I'm talking about the underlying problems with the expressions. But even the expressions, אוזני השם, ומפני הדוחק המצריך אותנו להודיעו ולעמוד על מסיעותו, בלשונות שרגילים בני אדם להודיעה לקטנים, לנשים, להמון העם. It's using the words that are most basic to the uneducated sectors of society, shall we say, or as he says, women, children, and the uneducated people. והדחק הזה הביאנו להגשים הבורא. And therefore we had to anthropomorphize God. To give him created qualities, to give them understanding in ways that are close to their sechel, their understanding and their wisdom. If we tried to use actual words, no one would understand. Not the matter and not the words. Think in terms of, where Rambam says, if you told people to serve God without prayer, only with fasting, the people can't handle it. So too here, so they couldn't handle it without korbanot. You can't explain existence in purely just apophatic knowledge, which we're going to come to in a second, because I'll skip over the rest of that there. According to Mori Qafih and Rambam, metaphor is not ideal. Metaphor is used to establish a basic level of understanding of God's existence. Understand that God has a hand, then remove the physical understanding of the idea and understand that really God has no hand. You need to discard your childish primary school education that you got told that God stretched out his hand and he took out the people, he picked them up, and okay, right. Disagrees with both of Rav Kook's points. Deep language cannot adequately communicate mystical ideas. This is apophatic knowledge, which I'm definitely not going to talk about now because we definitely have no time for it. But again, the point is not to convey deep mystical ideas through speech, because that can't be done. Speech is the basic level of understanding. Anything above that, you've gone wacky, you've gone off the rails, right? It's the wrong way, right? The ideas put forward, even by way of metaphor, are problematic ideas. So he's saying, even if you want to tell me these metaphors, they're not good ideas. And we're not going to go through this now, but this is the Zohar over here, where it basically says like Shema Yisrael is really the unification of 5 separate parts of God, which obviously you can understand would make Mori Qafih very upset. So that's the part of it that we're not going to look at now. But basically, yeah, the ways metaphor are problematic ideas. And just to say now as well, you'll never obviously, so this goes without saying, and Harambam did not need to spell this out, but I'll spell this out anyway, because apparently it doesn't go without saying. God does not have any digestive system. He also doesn't have a reproductive system. The Zohar's idea that creation comes about because God is in mystic sexual union with himself is completely a metaphor that is way, for Mori Qafih, is way off the rails. It's like the metaphor is the basic understanding. There is no basic understanding of God that you're gaining from talking about God's, nukba and his, ze'er and the union that they create and the, whatever, the cosmic syzygy. Like that is completely not helpful in understanding real mystical ideas. It's only distracting. Those things are required, l'kiyum hamin, as Rambam says. They are required to propagate the species. They are not required for gods. So these are 3 things that we just looked at in terms of these letters. Did Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai write the Zohar, the contradiction from Talmud? Is all of Kabbalah or the Zohar authentic? An admission from Rav Kook, but an attack nonetheless from Mori Qafih? And are the Sefirot literal, and does that make anything better? So with that in mind, let's just stop the share, and I'll just conclude having looked at those. The questions we kind of need to ask ourselves regarding these ideas are as follows. Basically, what is the Zohar problematic? Is there enough of a, what mysticism kind of is there that we can attach ourselves to? And, without the Zohar, how easy will it be for us to extricate Zoharic kind of ideas from mystical ideas? And these really, there's questions that there was, got the name of the person who translated it now, who translated the letters between Shadal and Ben Moseg, who writes these questions like that. We need to consider how much of Orthodox Judaism is intimately tied up with Kabbalah. And you go to people and you say, don't do Daniel Klein. Thank you, Sina. So Daniel Klein translated. He asked like, how much, what would happen if you talk to people? I was on a WhatsApp group. This is anecdotal and will end. I was on a WhatsApp group that will remain nameless, where someone said, what is the source for praying for people's refuah? So I responded with the Halakha and Harambam in Hilchot Avodah Zarah that you can't do that. And I got a private message from someone saying, you can't post things like that. You're going to destroy the Jewish world. Okay. And I said, I think if the Jewish world stands or falls on me quoting a halakha from Harambam, the Jewish world is in serious dire straits. So these are questions we need to ask ourselves. What is the role of the Zohar? Are there things that are positive that we can take from it? How much is it pogea b'yichud Hashem? How much does it attack the idea of the unity of the divine? And what can we take from it? How much of Orthodox Judaism is tied up with it? But these are definitely, to see these 2 great individuals speaking to each other with great respect, discussing these ideas, is certainly a wonderful thing. I encourage everyone to buy the book. And with that, I'll conclude, hand over back to Ohad.
Wow, thank you so much, Ben. That was super insightful, very well presented. We'll go for questions right now, comments. If anyone has any of that, they can raise their hand, unmute, right in the chat box. And I'm sure Ben will do a great job at taking them. I'll start off by asking, what was sort of the conclusion of the letters? Like, was it, meaning how did it end off, and was it publicized then? Meaning, was the community aware of the conversation, or was it just sort of a private interaction?
So you want me to spoil the ending? So Harav Kook ends his letter by saying, like, I will be done l'chaf sechut. I will judge you favorably and assume that you were doing this for the sake of God, but you need to retract your statement. And Mori Qafih ends with 8 or 9 points. He's like, firstly, secondly, thirdly, goes all the way through to 9, and basically says, these are my issues, and I'm not retracting anything, and you need to retract because you are pogea b'yichud Hashem. They discuss, like, he addresses the ideas that Rav Kook brings, like he does, but there isn't a follow-up after that. It just kind of, I assume it peters out. I mean, he died 3 months later. So to be honest, maybe Rav Kook would have written a response, but then he heard that he died. Like I'm saying, by the time the letter got there and then he read it and then had time to respond, yeah. So, but and in terms of do people know? I have no idea. Sorry.
Right.
I had a question, Ben. First of all, it was fantastic, so thank you so much. From the letters of Mori Qafih, does it sound like it's somebody who is very well versed in the Zohar and somebody who spent time actually studying it? Did he know what he was talking about, if you like, when it comes to the Zohar, even though he was so against it?
Yeah, you definitely get that sense. I mean, you get that more from Milchamot Hashem. If you read Milchamot Hashem, you really see. I mean, Milchamot Hashem is like a constructed conversation, right, where he's like talking between two people, like. But you definitely get a sense, like there's deep discussions of Zoharic literature. Like he definitely knew it, like he was familiar with it. It was all around him when he was growing, in Yemen as well. But he's quoting all the commentaries on it, all the Kabbalistic works that they had around, without any kind of hesitation or lack of knowledge to do so. He's very, he understands the concepts as well and what they refer to. Like he also assumes that you might not if you're reading the letter. So for example, where he talks about the 5 parts of God that you unify when reciting the Shema, he writes like in brackets, he puts in like, by the way, this is referring to this and this is referring to this aspect, and this is like a code word for the Zohar when it means this. So he definitely understands Kabbalistic doctrine. Yeah, definitely. I think my second cousin has asked a question. Does Rav Kook respond to the source in Ma'ila or not receiving prophecy? No, he doesn't respond. There's no response that I'm aware of. I haven't seen people addressing this source in Ma'ila. I'm sure that people do, or there's typical things like, he did receive prophecy, but it was covered, it was hidden and he couldn't receive it, or he received the prophecy later, or anything like that. There's various ways you could kind of wrangle your way out of it. But the level of prophecy, I'll say something about the prophecy. By the way, as I said, Mori Qafih died like 3 months later after he wrote his letter. So could have been that he would have responded. We just don't know. But something about the prophecy, you're not talking about like vague prophecy, a star shall go forth of Jacob, from Jacob and things like that, or that's that's a great one. But these vague prophecies, the prophets are not Nostradamus even. Like, if Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai is writing these things and he's making these predictions with a level of prophecy that is completely unprecedented, like the things that it talks about, the rise of Islam, the rise of the Crusades, the use of nekudot, the use of the vowels, right, the signs. You're talking about a level of prophecy like heretofore unseen in any kind of Jewish context whatsoever. Like really, so it's like a level of prophecy that is just it's just shocking. Like to then say that Rabbi Shimon was not even visited by a malach, but he had deep insights into the future is mad. It's like it's a crazy idea. It stands in direct contradiction. There's no way to get around that. Yeah. Any other questions?
I know you brought this at the end as sort of like the further questions of sort of what mysticism, not Zoharic, can we build when we are essentially, what system do we have in serving God? Does Rav Qafih have a system that he subscribes to, that he promotes?
I don't know. I would assume it's however he understood the Moreh would be his mysticism. I would guess that that's the case. Yeah, if you want, go and read Homo Mysticus, right? Like it's that's a great thing to read. I'm gonna say there's a message chat. Very love of Cook's approach in many ways, and it's beautiful by itself. Also do struggle with what seems like Catholic basis, and this seems not possible to read out both with looking forward to reading the book. Okay, very nice. Yeah, if Rabbi Dweck did a class on Rav Kook, and spoke about his idea, especially because the thing is, when you take panentheistic notions, drops sparks of God in everything and returning that to God, you it crosses over to an extent with the idea that everything you do can be to serve God. You've just got this theocentric versus anthropocentric thing going on. Like, am I the center of the universe and my cosmic actions have like huge repercussions, or is God the center of the universe and I improve myself? But practically speaking, you're doing everything for the sake of God, which is why there's a book, Torah Umadar, by Norman Lamb, and he characterizes different models of quote unquote modern orthodoxy, whatever you want to use with that term. And he puts Harambam and he puts Rav Kook. And I think that his description of Rav Kook is much more similar to what Harambam really holds than his description of Harambam. Like, I think his description of Harambam is very much like the typical metaphysics, science. Like, I think that underplays a lot of what Harambam was about. And I think it's much more similar to Rav Kook. So if you're interested, go like the class from the Habarites from the first year. So it's on YouTube of him going through a piece by Rav Kook in Orot. But yeah.
I know this is you were just sharing the Rambam in the Moreh, but he was making a distinction between sort of different types of metaphor. So you have, and like you would say that, listen, it's too far to say like he tasted. But we do have, like, for example, we say he doesn't have a shoulder, but we say he has a hand. Like, he literally, the Torah says that he literally carried things out, and I took you out. Like, oh, I didn't carry you on a shoulder, but I did take you out in the hand. It's also hard to hear how like a simple Jew reading the text is going to be like, oh, you see, he didn't say taste. So you see, that shows me that there's this massive distinction between, like, that's not happening when people read them.
So I think there's a couple of points to bear in mind here. The first is that they're not necessarily conscious. There's a subconscious element. If I think about God seeing, there's already distance in my mind. If I think about God tasting, there isn't. With regards to the shoulder point, Harambam points out it's only for bearing. A hand can do kind of other. The problem with the hand, with the Harambam writes, is that to do an act, to do anything, you need to have a hand in human terms. To lift, to move, anything, you need hands and legs. And that's the whole point of Harambam, is to show you that hands and legs can mean other things and not literal things. And so, and furthermore, just, Mori Qafih points this out in the letters as well. He says, whenever the Torah tells you God has a hand, God has eyes, it's immediately followed by, be very careful to remember, you never saw a picture. I'm trying to think a bit what the pasuk is now. It's in there's one coming up in Beit Hanan. It says Utmuna inachem ro'im, or something like that, right? You didn't see any image. Like, God took you out with the hands, but you saw no image on Sinai. Like, there was no picture, right? So there's those three things to bear in mind. I think one is it's kind of subconscious, like what metaphors we're using. Two is that the Torah warns you not to do it, will not do. And three is that there, shoulder is only for carrying, hands do other things as well. There's a balance between necessity and function, like the functionality of it. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we'll close it with that. Thank you so much, Ben. That was really incredible. Very well presented. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Stay tuned. We're going to have the third installment of our students presenting. And with that, Laila Tov, everyone. Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.